In the Soviet Union, there was no such thing as an environmental limit. Industry was king, and nature was collateral damage. Let us begin with Karabash. Nestled in the Ural Mountains, this area was once covered in dense pine forest. But after a copper smelter was built in 1910, the air filled with sulfur dioxide. By the 1970s, emissions had reached 180,000 tons annually. Acid rain scoured the hills, the trees died, the rivers ran black, and the land turned to ash. Today, Karabash is often labeled one of the most polluted places on Earth. And if you stand on the hills around it, you will not see green. You will see rust. Then there is Norilsk, the Arctic city built on permafrost and human misery. It was founded by Gulag labor in the 1930s. Temperatures here drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius, but the pollution burns year-round. Norilsk's nickel and palladium smelters alone emit close to 2 million tons of sulfur dioxide annually, more than the entire output of France. The snow falls black. Locals suffer from respiratory diseases. In 2020, a fuel tank collapsed due to melting permafrost, spilling 21,000 tons of diesel into the Ambarnaya River. It was one of the worst oil disasters in Arctic history. And what about the Aral Sea? Once a thriving inland sea, its ports were bustling fishing hubs. The Soviet dream to transform Central Asia into a cotton empire led to mass irrigation projects. Rivers like the Amu Darya and Sir Darya were dammed and diverted. The sea began to retreat, slowly, then catastrophically. By 2014, it had shrunk to 10% of its original size. Moynak, once a fishing town, is now surrounded by desert. Ships lie marooned in the sand. Dust storms carry salt and pesticide residue, causing skyrocketing rates of bronchitis and cancer. Children born here today face some of the worst health outcomes in Central Asia. This was not limited to surface pollution. Underground, things were even darker. In 1957, the Mayak nuclear complex near Kyshtym suffered one of history's worst nuclear accidents. A cooling system failed. A massive chemical explosion released radioactive material over an area the size of Luxembourg. 270,000 people were exposed. Villages were bulldozed and erased from maps. Yet for decades, the Soviet public was kept in the dark. The zone was simply referred to as the East Urals radioactive trace. Even the seas were not spared. Between the 1960s and 1980s, the Soviet Navy dumped nuclear submarine reactors directly into the Arctic, including the Barents and Kara Seas. At least 17,000 containers of radioactive waste were deliberately sunk. Reactors from K-27, K-11 and K-219, with nuclear fuel still inside, now rest beneath the waves, leaking slowly into fragile ecosystems. In some zones, radiation exceeds safe levels by factors of 10, even 100. And then, of course, there was Chernobyl. In April 1986, a safety test at Reactor 4 went catastrophically wrong. The explosion released radioactive isotopes across Belarus, Ukraine, and beyond. Entire towns like Pripyat were abandoned. Children were the most affected, particularly their thyroid glands. By 2005, over 4,000 thyroid cancer cases had been linked directly to Chernobyl's fallout. Yet the full death toll remains a subject of political debate, with estimates ranging from 4,000 to 90,000 depending on methodology. One village outside the zone, still occupied in the early 1990s, had fruit trees that glowed faintly under UV light due to cesium contamination. Locals called them ghost pears. The environmental math was staggering. By 1988, the USSR was responsible for 79% of US carbon emissions, yet its GDP was only half that of America. That meant the Soviets generated 1.5 times more pollution per ruble than the US did per dollar. And there was no public debate, no Greenpeace, no checks. Scientists who raised alarms, like hydrologist Sergei Zaligin, risked their careers, or worse. Zaligin fought to halt one of the USSR's most insane ideas, the Siberian River reversal. The plan was to use nuclear bombs to excavate canals and redirect rivers like the Oby and Irtysh to irrigate Central Asia. In 1971, 3 nuclear devices were detonated near the Pechora River. The result? A cratered, radioactive lake that still glows on Geiger counters. The project was only halted after public backlash and mounting costs, not environmental concerns. Even places you have never heard of bear the scars. In Dzerzhinsk, a city east of Moscow, chemical weapons were produced for decades. At one point, the groundwater contained dioxin levels 17 million times the safe limit. Average male life expectancy dropped below 50. Locals joked that the only thing you could not poison was the rats, because they were already mutants. And on the Kola Peninsula, reindeer herders still worry. Their herds graze near nickel mines. Children born nearby show higher rates of birth defects. Blood samples from residents show levels of cadmium and lead that would raise alarms in any Western health agency. Today, many of these places still function. Norilsk is still mining, Karabash still smelts copper, and many polluted lakes are still without warning signs. In the end, the Soviet environmental legacy is not just about pollution. It is about ideology. The idea that nature was a resource to conquer, that economic growth could never come at too high a cost, that secrecy, not science, would protect the people. But nature keeps the receipts. Some scars cannot be hidden, not from satellites, not from historians, and not from the people still breathing the air, drinking the water, and trying to grow food where nothing green should grow.